Hello there, everyone. My name is Sanak. I am one of the Star Wars lads here coming live to you all. Uh, it's a little bit different this week. This is going to be a much shorter one, and it's been a bit delayed, but I figured I'd come on, talk up a little bit of the news that was coming on here for Star Wars lads, for Star Wars in general, and then answer some of you guys' questions about Star Wars and just whatever else interest that you got. It doesn't have to be Star Wars. These live Q&As, they're here to obviously be a space to discuss anything and all things Star Wars, but it's not limited to that. So if you want to talk Star Wars with me, if you want to just catch up on some of the latest news, you're going to get all of that here right now in this live. And stay tuned. We've been dropping a lot of videos. We've had tier lists, we've had a bunch of original content, a lot of shorts, community polls. Even though Liam is out of town right now, Star Wars Lads is still pretty active, and it'll only start ramping up and being more active that I'm finishing up a little bit of a setup in my own room here. But yeah, no, we'll go through kind of some of the things that have been going on in the last week or so. Not too much, but if you got anything related to Star Wars, drop it in the chat. I'll give it a lot of time. This is going to be one of the best live Q&As to just discuss anything and all things Star Wars for you. So, without further ado, we're going to kind of start off with just the Skeleton Crew news that we've gotten. Unfortunately, Skeleton Crew did not reach the Nielsen top 10. This is the first Star Wars live action TV show to fail to do that. Even Acolyte, despite its struggles, despite hemorrhaging a lot of viewers over the weeks, it still had a couple of bumps up and came to the bottom part of top 10. But unfortunately, Skeleton Crew did not really get that similar response. And it's a bit of a shame. You'd kind of hope that things would be a bit different, but that's okay. It wasn't necessarily a show that I think most people were expecting much out of. It turned out to be a really, really fun, awesome show. It's got a lot of great story. It's got its own little mini universe. It can really definitely dive back into the Mandalorian season 1 vibes of just kind of being an isolated story that, you know, people can focus in on and not have to worry about every single little connection. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like just on the numbers alone that we're going to get a season 2. Now, that's not saying that we know this as a guarantee, obviously, because Disney's not relying on Nielsen. Disney's not relying on any other aggregator for reviews. They're all estimates, anyhow. The only hope here is that Disney kind of sees the future for a lot of these child actors, sees a lot of potential for what they're going to do here with the story, maybe sees them as characters that can pop in other TV shows and then have their future story be continued in animation or some books or comics. So, I'm still optimistic about it. Obviously, I'm saying that because I'm a bit more of a fan of it than Acolyte, and I had a lot more hopes for Acolyte. And I know Liam would definitely have the same feelings there. But this was a strong first season. This felt like something like a Bad Batch where you're like, man, it hit almost everything on the nail. I can't wait to see how it develops. Same thing with early Clone Wars. Same thing, honestly, from the jump from Mando season 1 to season 2. Even if people really love season 1, I think both Liam and I have always talked about how season 2 managed to balance out the interconnectivity, but still being very familiar to people who are, still kind of getting used to Star Wars through The Mandalorian. So, I was a big fan of the show. I was a bit realistic about where the show was ultimately gonna go. And the only disappointment for me out of it was that I wish there was more to do with the parents in general, but that's okay. That didn't happen. And we'll move forward here and hope for the best for the show. But Nielsen, at the end of the day, is still a very reputable source of how well a TV show is doing, how many viewers there are. So far, it doesn't seem like we're on track to get a season 2, but who knows? Maybe Disney Plus, now that we kind of finished that 2020 slate and kind of finished a lot of this early celebration stuff, maybe they're moving forward at making proper TV shows where, this could be a scenario where you get Mandalorian shows that have proper naming schemes, like not just being like Ahsoka, even though Ahsoka is about Sabine. It's basically a quasi Rebels sequel, right? Maybe we'll get some properly named TV shows where characters of Skeleton Crew can kind of bump into the story, can be something that's more of an overall New Republic storyline, kind of situated in multiple different arcs in the same way that we've gotten out of the Clone Wars, right? What we gotten out of animation, but now we can kind of jump around the galaxy, jump around to different things and different events, shaping and bolstering up the initial days of the New Republic in a way that we haven't really even seen from the Mandalorian or the Ahsoka show or Book of Boba Fett. So, that's maybe me looking at it a little bit more long term and optimistically. Again, I'm gonna hope for the best. That's just how it is. But yeah, we'll see what goes with the Skeleton Crew. Again, it is unfortunate. I think a lot of us here really were happy and really pleased by what we saw at the show. But yeah, like Star Wars Order pointed out here, what do you guys think about the Skeleton Crew viewership numbers? The only thing to think of is that they're not unexpected, but it is fairly disappointing that even the finale didn't break through, especially because the creatives, Ford and everyone, John Watts, they were saying like, there's some positive signs trending toward this being a show that kind of ends really strongly, maybe cracks the top 10. And I think if it had even done a little bit of that statement of like, hey, it just barely hit number 10 in the originals or something, that'd be a great sign for its longevity. As much as I think this is a show that's going to have stable growth, especially at the end of January and maybe the first week of February, we're kind of jumping into a season where there's like stuff like Cobra Kai kind of finally finishing out. There's a hype for Daredevil coming back as a new entire show on Disney Plus with all the Netflix shows being canonized. Invincible's going on. It's a weird, tough situation for a show that is for the most part kind of forgotten, delayed for a whole year, to then just ramp up because of just word of mouth, especially since it came out on some weeks during Christmas break, during a New Year's Day break, right? So it wasn't really given a fair chance scheduling either. So even if it did grow and or said stayed steady, I was always expecting a drop. And with how this year is starting off fairly strongly for superhero stuff, I can even talk about Brave New World a little bit if people guys are excited about that new Captain America film, want to hear my thoughts. But yeah, I mean, franchises are kind of kicking a gear right now, especially franchises that have had successful seasons or successive releases already. So Skeleton Crew had a lot of its work cut out for it. And if it was part of a bigger show, like I said, like if it was an arc or part of a season that kind of deals with like these pockets of the universe that are starting to be opened up to the New Republic or even hidden away from the Empire and have connections to Old Republic, High Republic, maybe this could have been justifiable as a continuation in some form in another season, in another arc. But as its own show, it's Star Wars Order. It's gonna be a lot harder to justify it. All right, and then we got a question here uh, from Zarin Jamis. Random question, but just curious if you also keep a physical Star Wars book collection like Liam too, or do you prefer Kindle audiobook? Would love to see a bookshelf tour sometime. That is entirely Liam's forte. He's a collector. If you see parts of his room, he's even got like all his baseball collection stuff. He's got old Kenner toys from the 70s. He collects a lot of comic books. It's just something that's he's grown up. His dad taught him how to do. It's not really something that I was really shaped into doing. I used to have some Star Wars books. Like my first two ever Star Wars books were Jedi Quest from the Jedi Academy trilogy and Assault on Salonia, the second in the Corellian trilogy. I think I had a couple here and there, some like junior novel books, some young adult books, but I was more of the guy like that was taught to go to the library to read the books as they're coming out, or like frankly, just be like, oh, I read some Wikipedia article and I got super interested, and then let me see what it's referencing. Oh, that's pretty cool. Like that's how I read like a lot of my favorite stories with Corran Horn, like I Jedi, right? That was just from the school library. So my parents always pushed me to, make use of the library and all the resources there, and I did the same day. So yeah, I'm a kind of that like that, and I do have a Kindle. Well, I don't have a Kindle, I have a Kobo, and I kinda get some of the files for, like, the older books. Right now, I'm reading through a lot of the Bantam era books, Raid Squadron. We're gonna definitely have a Legends Live Club discussion here in the next month or so, but I'm finishing up the Raid Squadron trilogy right now. Had to take a little bit of a break because I've been reading or more accurately, been listening to the audiobook for The Mask of Fear, the new uh, book that's coming out that's supposed to be like a trilogy, one book each year, kind of deal with the political realities of the early days of the Empire, kind of leading up to Andor, kind of leading up to Rogue One. So that's definitely gonna be out soon too. I'm working on that review, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, because we get a lot of the books as audiobooks, that's kinda how I engage with them nowadays. And then if I read old books, it's really through my Kobo. So yeah, and if I really wanna hold a book, I go to the library. That's kinda how it's always been, and I don't really have the space for it. I mean, I just moved out here, so I'm still kinda in flux, and yeah, I think it's kinda hard to beat what Liam's got for the bookshelf tour. He's only got 3 or 4 books left, honestly, so that's, never really been a priority for me. Alright, and then before we get to the next couple questions, we'll jump into the next topic that we have here. And the next topic that I wanna kinda really address is everything new Jedi Order. Obviously, it's gonna be small tidbits, it's not gonna be any huge major stories, but there's some interesting things about some of the developments that are kinda happening around the film, especially as things are kinda coming forth about, "Hey, like, we've lost another writer, and now here's another writer," and we covered that on our last stream. But this time we've gotten a little bit of news from Stephen Knight, centered around an interview that he had with regarding his Peaky Blinders movie and just some of the things that he contributed to the new Jedi Order film, as well as Daisy Ridley's thoughts and what Maggie Lovett on a Collider interview about what she's kinda doing behind the scenes with the film, how the process is like to finally bring this to the screen despite the delays and everything. So, yeah, I think I'll start with the Stephen Knight portion because it's probably the most interesting simply because he's kinda come in and kind of outright said that, "Hey, I've kinda come in, I've wrote my parts, I don't expect that to be the full final version, but I expect to see a lot of my ideas kinda be presented in the final film." If he gets credit or not, that's kind of up in the air, but that's kinda where he sees his involvement with the film. He's kinda talking about it in a way that is very classically Hollywood. Like, a lot of the scripts that you see turn into great films, they've got multiple rounds, multiple people's honestly, decades of involvement from so many different writers. So, in the situation that we're in right now, obviously, New Jedi Order, Charmin is still the attached director to it, but writers kinda come and go. They kinda add little things. Another writer comes in and they're like, "Ah, that's not working." Maybe upper management, our producers are saying they want one thing. So writers are kinda tasked with bringing their own ideas and then kinda adjusting to the realities of what the studio kinda wants or what their feedback is like. So it looks like Steven Knight was asked to bring in some of his own ideas. It seems like he was probably more centered around bringing Daisy Ridley's version of Rey, only being 15 years older than we last saw her in The Rise of Skywalker. If we looked at Lindelof's version, the big rumor for that was that this was gonna deal with, like, a 70, 80-year-old, almost Obi-Wan Kenobi figure-esque, Rey for an upcoming trilogy, an upcoming story, and what we've kinda heard about the different tracks, what we've heard about Rey being probably the most noticeable character, most recognized character from Disney Star Wars, they've been kinda mapping out different stories where she can appear in, and New Jedi Order's kinda gone from this, like, one thing that could've exploded into more stories and turned into, like, "Hey, maybe this should just be a solo film, build out some books, comics, animation, or something, maybe even a video game, but then let's bring in a proper episode 10, 11, 12 with Simon Kinberg or something." They're really putting a serious plan there, and I'm excited for that. I think that's the right thing to do, but what Steven Knight is saying only makes it seem like he's kinda been asked to bring the Daisy Ridley version and not the Helen Mirren version that was kinda rumored to kinda take over a 70, 80-year-old version of Rey. So, this is probably the most concrete confirmation of, like, what his role was for the writing and everything, and, that's actually kinda exciting to know that now that we've got another writer involved, they're all gonna kinda build off of what he's done, maybe punch up some elements, maybe focus on the political elements like we kinda discussed about last week in that interview. So, yeah, we won't know what this film ultimately will look like. There's always gonna be that worry about, like, too many cooks in the kitchen, but this feels a little bit different than, like, an Acolyte with a writer's room where maybe there was too many people for how short those episodes were, and this is more of just a natural progression that a lot of films go through before they actually make it to the silver screen, where they've got so many writers over so many years, and a lot of things can be jettisoned, a lot of things can be brought back together, and the best elements are put together, and then everyone kinda gets a bit of a credit. So, pretty excited to hear that news. And then kinda adding to that, we've got what Daisy Ridley said about her involvement with Maggie Lovett on the Collider interview. And she's not exactly saying she's a producer, but she's basically saying she is. She says she's been very involved, involved in how much I know about going on with the story, what's going on with the script, not necessarily rewriting the script or making a big impact on it, but she's aware about all that. She's been super involved the last few years. And, that she thinks that coming to set, being involved in almost every single detail is the best way that she can tell the story, that she can contribute to the story, working with the best actors for the job, best crews. And compared to the sequels, she's a lot more cognizant about like what it takes to make a Star Wars film. And obviously, there are things about the sequels I'm sure that she thought she did great, and maybe they all thought they did great, and then the reception was different. Maybe there are things that they didn't feel they did great, but like, hey, actually, that was well received. That is something that we can kind of develop and push forward further. So, yeah, I think Daisy hasn't really said much new that we known about, but she's only really doubling down that she is involved. She's seen the latest script. She's been involved with the story. She's really happy where we're going with the story and the eventual product. And, she's just super excited to be such a big player instead of just the young girl on the block, right? Where she was kind of the baby when episode 7 was being produced and worked on with J.J. Abrams at the helm. So, not a lot of news there with the new Jedi Order film. Nothing about plot or characters or casting, but this is probably, in the last couple of weeks, a nice upward trajectory of kinda everyone being a little bit positive, even the people who've left the projects and saying some, like, really notable things about the process and how much serious involvement there is from almost every party. Again, I'm always gonna be a little concerned that it's been taking this long, but I'd rather come out and be right. So, pretty pleased about that so far. All right. Question from Jose. Since we're asking random questions, is it laundry day? Xmas sweater in February? Well, technically, this is just the Super NES version of the Battle of Hoth. So you can watch Empire Strikes Back at any point of the year, Jose. You don't have to just watch it for Christmas. But all my Star Wars sweaters are mostly Christmas themed. I have that other one with Grogu and the Mandalorian. That's like a proper ugly Christmas sweater. And then I have another one that's the Darth Vader, like Ukrainian or some sort of Eastern European language poster design, kind of where the helmet's blowing up. Um, so no, it's not laundry day. I just wanted to wear a sweater today. So I always wear this anytime it's a little cold. So that's how it is. And then a question from Matthew. How is everyone? Well, hope everyone can reply in the chat there, but I'm doing pretty well, Matthew. A little delayed on the stream. I've been kind of involved in setting up my new room in my new place. So haven't really been able to do a lot of things like working on new videos and edits, or at least not at the pace that I want to be at. But finally got my, desk mostly set up. Got a couple of things up here on the shelf that I got. There'll definitely be adjustments. I'll get a poster up here, and it's a really nice poster of Empire Strikes Back. So, yeah, work in progress, but definitely a little tired. But by next week, once Liam is back and everything, I'll be quite pleased with where I'm at right now. So, yeah, that's what it is right now. Critical Thinker says, "Hey, Sanak, how you doing?" Like I said, pretty good. Just kind of dealing with the move and everything, but pretty happy, pretty pleased about how things are. And it's been a quieter week in Star Wars, so kind of just been more focused on editing and reading. So yeah, you brought up the question, have you read Mask of Fear? I addressed it a little bit earlier, but I have. I'm kind of rereading some Paul's parts of it, but I'm also editing Liam's parts and my parts. So hopefully in the next week or so, I'll have that review out for you guys. Um, I'm not going to talk any spoilers, and it's also kind of a hard book to really spoil because it's so politically minded. It's so much more about characters like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, who are not classic action heroes. But yeah, Alexander Freed, I can say, definitely delivered a really, really strong book. So definitely excited to share my thoughts about that, and definitely looking forward to the next 2 books in the trilogy, the one next year and the year after that, and what connective tissue there can be with Andor, what can be there with Rebels, with all the other things that are Dark Time, A New Hope, kinda changing the whole thing for the rebellion. So, yeah, definitely been pretty pleased by the book and just what Freed has achieved here, especially with what Gilroy achieved in Andor. So, yeah, quite happy, quite pleased there. Alright, and then gonna move on to some other small details and other small stories. We can kinda talk about Star Wars Outlaws. Unfortunately, Star Wars Outlaws, again, has had, like, another down update. As you guys know, the season pass has been coming out. I still haven't put out, uh, my gameplay playthrough of the last DLC. I'm kinda waiting for the one with Hondo Naka first before I put those both up on the channel as part of the walkthroughs that I did when the game initially came out. I know a lot of changes have been made to the gameplay mechanics that people really do like, but yeah, for the most part, I do think that, this second adjustment, the second story here is a bit of a downer. It seems like after Ubisoft did this very rare thing of, like, adjusting what their expected sales is for the winter quarter, they've kinda dropped it again, and they're like, "Yeah, this is a slow, long-term grower, a lot of positive reviews on the Epic Store, on Steam, and everything." People are showing a lot of interest in how immersive this game is. People are quite happy about that, but they're looking at it as, like, a slow, long-term grower, and it's not unexpected. It's a game that's, like, got the bones of a really great game. It's super immersive. I think if you've checked Liam and my review, we really enjoyed how you could feel like you're stuck into the game, and the fact that it was open world definitely contributed to that, but there was a lot of nice details put into characters and the connections with other stories like Aftermath and the planets involved there. All that was pretty cool. I think we were all quite pleased with that. It's just more so that Kay Vess and the story that she's got is kind of a rethread of stuff that we've seen in comics with other characters that are kinda defined in those a little bit more sillier, a little looser mediums, and this kinda just got repeated here. So, that's a bit annoying, honestly, I'm not gonna lie about that, but, I think some of the things I've heard about the DLC have been pretty good with Lando and everything, just that it's been short. It feels like she'll be a character that'd be fun to follow in the early New Republic. Right now, kinda sandwiched in between everything that's going on with War of the Bounty Hunters and all that, there was only so much that she could have done. It's nice that at kinda the 5th little group, the 5th syndicate that's involved in War of the Bounty Hunters, just by name only, actually becomes the centerpiece for Kay Vesta's story. So all those things are great, but yeah, it looks like Ubisoft has had a lot of its decisions with even before Star Wars, but with just its open world formula start to bite it in the butt, right? It's been a little unfortunate. Everyone knows that they can make open world games, but does it necessarily mean it's worth on day one launch? No. Most people know you can buy the Ultimate Edition with $40 with all the DLCs, with all the cosmetics, and you'll have like a very solidly fun game that you can play for 30 to 40 hours and be pleased by that. As it is right now, not until that second DLC with Hondo comes out, where you have that DLC with Lando, with Hondo, and the base game, and all the gameplay changes that they made to the mechanics and improvement overall for the quality of life, will it probably be worth it for a lot of people? And that's a shame because I think if this game had been priced maybe $10 less, maybe something closer to Squadrons, I think it would have sold really well. Even if you're like, oh, I'm gonna come back to it in like a month or two when it's properly fleshed out. And it's not to say that this game is an outright failure, it's just not reaching the same targets that you'd expect. The first Star Wars open world game with all the details, with all the models they can scan, with the team of Lucasfilm Story Group, with Ubisoft, with EA and everything, but yeah, it's been missing its targets. That's unfortunate, but stay positive because we've seen games like Cyberpunk that were completely horrible at launch, basically functionally broken, and we never really had this problem with Outlaws. It was fine. It didn't really have a lot of the issues that Survivor really had that really were really bad on the PC port, even on the consoles and all that. But luckily, it seems like this is a game that has enough momentum, enough immersion, enough interest that if there's some new tie-ins, if there's some cosmetics kinda coming out maybe at the end of the year, when it's really got that full Ultimate Edition packed and ready to be sold for $40, I think people will play this game and find themselves looking forward to a proper sequel, and like Liam and I have said, a New Republic sequel where she's a bit more experienced, where she's not just going through that origin story, but she gets to actually kinda carve out a proper place in the galaxy. I think that'll be great, but as it stands right now, eh, just to wait and see and play it if you really want to, but otherwise, you're probably gonna enjoy the walkthroughs and the Twitch gameplays out of that. Alright, jumping back into the chat here, guys, but Zara and Jameis said, "Yeah, that's fair. I love supporting local libraries as well. Definitely prefer physical copies over audiobook." Yeah, definitely. I think with Star Wars, the thing is that a lot of the EU books were the stuff that I grew up on and I could hold in my hands. A lot of canon, like, there still are physical books, but it feels like it's mostly reserved to the adult novels or the young adult novels of the High Republic. I very rarely see the young adult novels and below. Strangely, if I do see adult novel books, I sometimes see the junior novel, grade books from the High Republic because those are only in hardcover, whereas the young adult novels can kind of be in paperback. I mean, we didn't really have young adult novels when the EU was, like, in full swing. It was mostly adult novels and the different initiatives, right? You'd go from Bantam, New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, you got some trilogies like Dark Nest and stuff like that, but it was all mostly adult novels. It was that and then the comics, and then you'd see in, like, the little baskets on the ground in the kids section, like Jedi Apprentice, Jedi Quest. Obviously, there's been a much more of a big shift towards making young adult novels be almost at the same level as the adult novels, especially if they're tied into initiative. But it's still strange that you can't find those books. And then if you want to go back and read the EU, it's really hard to find anything that isn't hardcover now. And I struggle to find a lot of books past the Bantam era because at least the Bantam era, that's stuff that I guess like older audiences who've been around with the original trilogy or kind of came of age with Star Wars in the 90s and the early 90s probably were like, oh man, I want to read all these books that kinda kept the interest going right after the Heir to the Empire kinda blew open the door there. But once you kinda reach the late '90s, you reach New Jedi Order, it gets a lot harder, at least where I'm at, to find those books, so it's a bit disappointing, but yeah, whenever I get to read books in person physically, I definitely do like the library feel. It just there's some nostalgia to that for sure. And again, I do like to support local libraries and there's just so many resources. It's a nice place to sit and just enjoy a book and kind of lose yourself for a few hours. But yeah, audiobook, I'm not opposed to it. Again, that's kind of the only way we get all the recent canon releases. And, we're grateful to what Del Rey kind of lends out to us. But I can't say it wouldn't hurt to have that and a copy of the audiobook sent to us. I definitely would appreciate that. That probably would push me to at least build out a canon collection of all the young adult novels, and maybe even some of the junior novels. But so far, not really happening there. But yeah, I prefer physical books. When I'm reading like Wheel of Time and Dune, I need to read those physical. I can't read them on an ebook. I can listen to the audiobook and read through the pages, and I do have a paper copy of just the first Dune book, but it has to be something physical that I hold in my hand when I read something that feels almost ancient or like a fantasy story or like if Dune, like feels very limited technologically. So yeah, for certain stories, I think you got to read in the original medium. For Star Wars, just how much there is and how pulpy it can be. If I can read it hardcover, great. If not, I'm not really upset by that. All right. And then a question here from Critical Thinker. I finished reading Legacy of the Force. Really didn't like the revelation. Jaina randomly becomes a cheerleader for the Mandos. Jason also somehow almost dies to yeah. Oh boy. Legacy of the Force is inconsistent. That is the name of that whole series. Because honestly, on paper, there is a lot to like about it. I do think the Second Galactic Civil War being started by the Corellians, kind of the internal fracturing after the New Jedi Order and Darkness crises, it all kind of makes sense, especially now that you've kind of let the coming of age kind of conclude for Jaina and Jason, and you've got Luke, Han, and Leia be a bit older. You've got a lot of the survivors kind of helping reshape and rebuild the galaxy. the psyche of everybody after New Jedi Order, it makes a lot of sense. There are decisions in the series that I think make sense, even if I don't love it because of how short it is, right? Like, for example, when Luke kind of goes from the whole concept of the unifying force going to more the classic black and white view of the force, it's actually not a bad thing because he's really trying to bring structure into the Jedi Order that was missing and how he needs to kind of take over here. But what Legacy of the Force does with it is just kind of dump it in 6 or 7 books where it's just it just has to happen, right? I don't like that. And then, like, the Mando stuff, I mean, Travis and Denning are involved. It was gonna be like that. It's unfortunate. It was the 2000s. Some Mandos, especially with extended universe Mandos past Republic Commando. Oh boy, they just get their own culture and all that. That is really important. It's really cool and unique. But they start becoming like, oh, they could beat everybody. Even the Jedi are like kind of not even their equals. Like they're almost like second to them. And yeah, I get that it makes Boba look really cool as Mandalorian. He goes through his own very interesting stories around this time period. But I don't know, like, should Jaina and Jason really be soloed by Mandos? Should they really be super invested in Mando stuff? No, you don't have to. It makes sense for a character like in canon with Sabine because of her upbringing in the Mando religion and the Mando culture, and then she happens to have the Force, and she's worked with Ahsoka before. There's some connection with the rebellion, yada yada yada. What Jaina's got with Boba, I don't know, nothing. And then Jason, in some cases, he can wipe out the Mandos. In some cases, he's get knocked out by one. Yeah, it's weird. It's a series that, if anything, New Jedi Order should have been shrunk by 3 or 4 books, maybe. And Legacy of the Force should have been expanded by 2 to 3 and had a little bit more of the returning authors there. I think if we had that same tone and the same group of authors, maybe it feels a little too same, but it still would have been a nice continuation past New Jedi Order and where you'd actually feel the effects of everything. Like, again, I still don't understand by Legacy of the Force how basically most of the galaxy is like, yeah, we're already back to mostly a rebuilt state. Like, really? After everything being bomb formed and all that? After the devastation of that war? Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird series. I can't say I love it. But details like that, it's also very reminiscent of just the PT era of just the Mandalorians kind of becoming super big in books because of Travis, and then kind of just falling off after that, and then being redone by Filoni and what Filoni and George Lucas saw for the Mandalorians, and realizing that doesn't 100% mesh, even if there is definitely gray areas that can. And with Mandalorian and other properties, there's definitely hinting could still coexist. Alright. But I actually really liked Invincible. It's probably the best depiction of Jane in the EU so far and mostly stuck the landing. Overall, I really like the series despite some of its major flaws. And yeah, I think if you've been invested so far in all the developments of the series, it'll land fair enough. I just think that it's probably the worst post-Bantam series that's at least that's aged for me, like, the most poorly. Just because it had the most potential. It really did, and I think at least with Fate of the Jedi and all that, it's very strange, it's very weird. It starts off as a quest more so than anything, and then you've got the Lost Tribe of the Sith and Abeloth, and there's some cool things with Mortis that you really feel like even if it's not the best idea, they're engaging with it in a super serious way, versus where Legacy of the Force kind of feels like you're dealing with some post 9/11 America, dealing with a lot of the prequel trilogy politics. A lot of that weird thing that happened in the early to mid 2000s where you try to copy the prequels and then bring it to a much later point in the timeline. And again, parallels can happen. It's just it didn't really always seem like it made sense or worked out that way. So I get it. If you like the series, you like the series, and more power to you. I just find it to be the one that's aged the weakest, despite having a lot of the best potential, especially post New Jedi Order. And you think that it's done much better job than sequels did at the Solo Kid turns the dark side, depressed Luke story. Even if I think it could have still been done a lot better. Spoiler free thoughts on Fate of Jedi. I've already said what I want to think about Fate of the Jedi, but better job than sequels did at the Solo Kid. In the sense that, like, you see the turn happen, right? And books will always have that advantage. You can get into their headspace. You hear their thoughts out loud as you're reading it, right? You'll see old characters and their thoughts about the situation happening. You don't have a budget constraint, like yeah, there's some things about the medium of books that will never be untouched. That's why Liam has clamored for books to be a big thing for bringing in the original trilogy, big trio, and then connecting them into the Mandoverse. I agree with that. I also think there should be some animation and stuff, continuing past that for Luke and his Jedi Order, take advantage of the money that animation can do to depict some of these cool, awesome moments of power, of development growth, of interesting Jedi technology and knowledge and New Republic developments, etc. But yeah, I mean, you are picking up with Ben Solo, not as Ben Solo, right? It's unfortunate he doesn't actually have lines of dialogue as Ben Solo. He really just says "ow" and how Rey does the Force essence transfer and dies. I'm not gonna disagree with that, that is pretty weak. It's a very silly thing to not have him even have some lines, even if he absolutely nails the Harrison Ford mannerisms, like the shrug and, like, the swagger that inherently has to come with being a solo kid with the Skywalker blood mixed in together. That's unfortunate, but again, it's because a lot of his story has to be taking place during his childhood, during especially his teenage years. And we don't know what he did with Laura Santeca and Luke. We don't know how Snoke and Luke met and fought. We don't know what else is there with the Acolytes of the Beyond past what we've already seen in Shadow of the Sith and the Battle of Jakku maxi series. Man, there's a lot up in the air. We're picking up the story with him as a 30-year-old man. He's not a child, right? Obviously, what I really love about the sequels with Kylo Ren's characterization is that how tumultuous it is, how whiny he is, and how painful it is to have made this decision and some of these crazy decisions to double down on the dark side. But getting to that dark side and having that fall, it doesn't happen because it's already happened, right? So I don't think it's 100% of a fair comparison to make because that's not the intent of the story. Now, should it have been a part of that trilogy and more flashbacks or maybe something connections with Ray, with especially if we got to see the Knights of Ren fleshed out? Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. But as far as Ben Solo turning in that trilogy, no, because then that changes the whole scope and scale of it for me in the first place. All right, and then I'm think we're gonna jump back into some of the smaller things news-wise that we have too. Again, not a lot here this week, so definitely be jumping back to your questions here. But some other things that we've gone out of this week. We got the news that Book of Boba Fett is finally coming to physical in 4K Ultra HD, which is wow, finally, right? And I say that because it's not that it shouldn't have happened already. Yes, it had to have happened already, right? It's such a strange thing to me that we got season 1, 2, and then 3 coming out on physical, but then we didn't get the intermediary chapter of Book of Boba Fett, right? It is literally a chapter of the Maniverse, whether you like it or not, whether it is a story that services Book of Boba Fett's goals, not really, right? There's some weird things with the Hutt twins. It seems like you're getting some cool things with Mos Espa and then flashbacks, and then when it feels like it's finally getting some narrative progression and you're gonna have some of the psyche of Boba and what's changed about him, combining that prequel characterization, Dark Times characterization, original trilogy, everything after that, bam, you're jumped into 2 Mando episodes, which, they're pretty good, but within 2, 3 weeks, I was already kind of upset that, like, we spent an hour just kinda dealing with the N1 ship as, like, a side story that could have just been covered in a book or a comic. I liked seeing Pelimoto, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't have taken over the whole time, and if Fennec is gonna drop off the money at the end, at least have her interact with Boba and explain what he's doing, what he's planning when he's fighting up against all the different gangs and the different groups that are trying to take down the daimyo of Mos Espa, right? Don't get that, right? And then in the next episode, when we continue follow Mando, we get like a head nod, and that's really it. Right? That's frustrating, especially this being a 7-episode series that got an extra episode, right, to kind of add more Mando stuff. Sure, it had incredible Luke things, but yeah, it's a weird choice for it to have been shaped that way. But regardless, it should have been released on physical before Mando season 3. It's weird because there's gonna be plenty of people who have waited, who don't have Disney Plus, who might have picked up Mando season 1. And they're like, "Awesome, Mando season 2. Awesome, Mando season 3. Huh, didn't Grogu just leave with Luke? Why is he back already? Why is he with Din Djarin? Like, You can't just hand wave that off, right? You need to watch Boba Fett, even if it's structurally really, really strange and frankly bad for the Mandoverse overall story. It's almost like the Iron Man 2 of, like, they did so much setup for all these other things and continuations and connections that you kind of forgot about dealing with the main character and their story, right? When you're teasing some of the best potential stuff, like the devil in the bottle story that could really drive Iron Man 2 and doesn't happen, right? So, same thing happens here with Book of Boba Fett. It doesn't hurt Boba too much to me, honestly. It just makes him a little whiny and weak and, nerfs him when he could have actually kinda continued to be this honorable man with these darker aspects that differentiates him from Din, even if he is doing it for good reasons for Mos Espa, for Tatooine. So, yeah, this is something that had to have happened earlier. Sad that it didn't. Glad it's happened now. And if it gets people to watch it more and talk more about, Book of Boba Fett, awesome. I think there's some really cool things about it, even in the Boba stuff. I absolutely love that 2nd episode, so I think people deserve to see Tamora Morse again, and even though he says he's not Mandalorian Grogu, I'm gonna hope that he is in some way, or he's in Ahsoka or something like that. He deserves to come back and have a proper chance to have a little bit more of the gruffer, darker Boba, but one that's gone through a little bit of a weird arc and then settled into balancing out who he is and getting fully coherent episodes. All right, jumping back in the comics here, guys. Let's see. Where Critical Thinker says, "Where do you want the Mandalorian and Grogu movie to go? What sort of character arc would you want Din to have going off of season 3?" That's pretty interesting because a lot of people don't love season 3, but I'm actually someone who has been pretty upbeat about it and positive about it. I think it's sloppy. Do not get me wrong. I think the ordering could have absolutely changed, where you could have started more traditional like Mando season 1 and 2 and dealt with the pirate arc with Gorian Shard and everything. And then that would have led to information about Mandalore that would lead into that quest, that would lead into him kinda dealing with being like an expat basically and getting back into the clan. A weird thing that with the structure of it is that it kinda plays off the whole thing with, "Hey, that's weird. They're a cult. The Children of the Watch aren't really like this long-term tradition. They're just the survivors of Mandalore from Death Watch, and they've kind of just stuck to some very old principles that may or may not have been interpreted the right way." Okay, that's weird. He's indoctrinated. He's still gotta keep the mask on forever. He's always shocked by Bo-Katan and everyone else taking it off. It's a big key point in season 1 and season 2, but he gets past that for Grogu. And then he's like, "No, I have to redeem myself, and I have to wear the helmet." It's weird, I get it. People revert. People it's not like a linear path to recovery, right? It's the same way as addictions. You can make improvements, you can make big strides, and then you might slip up a little bit here and there, and it's a very common thing. So I don't think Disney's gonna play it off in that angle, but I would like some of the subtext to be playing it off like, okay, he got something that he needed for his soul just to feel calm and satisfied, but by doing so, he helped bring about some of the traditions with Bo-Katan and her group, some of the people who haven't necessarily lived on Mandalore, even during its peak days of the pre-prequels and during the prequels when they kind of went with the new Mandalorians with Satine and everything. Awesome. All right. Now they're all a little bit more invested in the traditions and the old ways. And hopefully this means that now that they're all living on that land that Din Djarin got from Greef Karga, maybe they start intermingling a little bit and loosening up at least a little bit. So I'd like to see that happen. And in the same way, I'd like to see that reflect absolutely on Din Djarin. So anytime the Mandalorians are over on his tract of land, maybe they're a little bit looser, maybe a little bit not as rigid as they are on Mandalore, right? Maybe in Mandalore, it's just as we're growing, as we're bringing in more new tribes, maybe we're just a little bit more traditionalist there. But outside of that, with the right groups, with the right people, you intermingle, you bring new and old, and you make something that's for the future of the Mandalorian. So that's how I'd look at it. So you can still have him kind of revert, still kind of deal with it as a bit of an addiction or like some like desperate craving of his. But then you jump into Mandalorian Grogu, and because he's going to spend a lot of time with Grogu, takes off his helmet. We kind of see that he has that helmet off, even if we don't see Din Djarin in that final shot of season 3. I'd like to see him be pushed further into that, maybe by Bo-Katan, by somebody else, but maybe by his experiences with Grogu. Maybe he learns more things on Mandalore on his way through all these quests and things that are happening on with the New Republic with Rada the Hutt and Sigourney Weaver's character and Zeb. I don't expect it to, but I would think that they need to level it out in a way that it's like it's not like Jaime in Game of Thrones where, yes, he could have slipped up and gone back to Cersei, but for that to happen like the last 2 episodes and not have some reckoning with why you made that choice, and then maybe considering, "Maybe I gotta go back to the right thing for me." Yeah, that didn't work for that series. Mandalorian Grogu looks like it can have multiple sequels and all that and can continue the story Din Djarin past it. So I expect it to at least even out some of that characterization and soften some of the more rougher and weirder choices about Din Djarin, about the cultish elements kinda just being accepted as is. So that's how I would look at it. But yeah, that's where I would go past season 3. It's still gonna be like season 1 and 2 vibes because that's what most people are familiar. Take the best plotting elements of season 3 and make it better. That's how you have to look at it. Alright, and then next question here also actually, Novarker says, "Hello there." Hello there, Novarker. This is a bit of a live Q&A, just chat, talk about whatever you want. So, drop any questions about Star Wars, canon, EU, maybe Marvel, or just whatever interests you got in fandoms that are, sports related or something else, and I'll dig into that for sure. Back to Critical Thinker here. What are you hoping to see out of Ahsoka season 2, and what do you think will happen on Peridea with Balin and Ahsoka? Do you think the Queen Mothers are, or I'm assuming you mean, uh, they're not grandmothers, they're called something else. Oh, yeah, I think they are called the grandmothers. Are a Sabbat replacement or that Enoch is Rook 2.0? Hmm, a lot of questions there for sure. It'll be interesting. Let's see. Let's start off with the what are you hoping to see out of Ahsoka season 2? Focus on Ahsoka, right? I think yeah, the Great Mother. Thank you, Skywalker's Academy. Oh, because you're reading the EU books, Critical Thinker? Yeah, yeah. I think we're all a little confused here too, so no worries. It's been a year plus since Ahsoka came out. But let's see. What are you hoping to see out of Ahsoka season 2? Ahsoka, right? Like this has got to be a season fully about her. I know people complain about Rosario Dawson's portrayal. Liam and I do not. And me especially, I always saw it as like we don't know what happened after Rebels leading into Ahsoka, the series. We know there's some training and that didn't work out. But for sure, there has to be some just psychological like struggle for her. Not necessarily trauma, but just an additional weight past Order 66, past Kanan's death, past everything that's kinda going on, past her literally being saved by Deus Ex Machina of the World Between Worlds, right? By Ezra, and being like, "Why am I still alive? Like, what am I gonna do here?" And then things going wrong with Sabine. Yeah, I'm sure that's why she's a little bit more stoic. I'm sure someone just came that fact that Rosario wasn't 100% comfortable with the character yet. But I think Filoni wisely leaned into that, and then when she's beaten by Balin and she's transported into the world between worlds and meets with Anakin and goes through that lesson, understands that, like, you can't blame yourself for survival, you can't say you wanna be dead, you're alive now, deal with it, move forward, and that's the only way you can. Be glad you're alive, right? My mistakes aren't yours. Maybe there's always gonna be a part of me that I've implanted in you. That's what Anakin would probably be kinda portraying through that lesson, but I'm not you. My choices were my own. My choices weren't caused by you. You did your best, and when we were separated, yeah, maybe you could have limited the damage, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that you would've, you know, been able to limit the influences of Palpatine. Obi-Wan couldn't do it. Just because you're my Padawan doesn't mean that you could have done it. It had to take Luke to do it, right? It's you see Obi-Wan cut one part of the mask, you see Ahsoka cut one part of the mask, but Luke is the one that takes off the mask and returns Anakin, right? So once she kinda goes through that lesson, she looks a lot more like her Rebels and Clone Wars version, like Ashley Eckstein. She's got a little bit of pop in her step. When she changes into the Ahsoka the White, kinda like Gandalf the White outfit, she's a lot more awesome and fun and cool and still serious in a way that still works from her live action portrayal in Mando season 2 and in the Book of Boba Fett. So I expect it to be dealing a lot more with her and now being like, okay, now I'm getting closer to the mysteries of Mortis, of my own survival. I see Mora again in the distance. Am I reaching my own conclusion? Honestly, I would think so, just because Filoni is like, yeah, no, just because you hear her voice in the end of The Rise of Skywalker doesn't mean she's dead. I think this is a good place for her to die. Any further extensions into her story would kinda continue to cheapen her. I know there's plenty of people who think that she should have just ended with Rebels, and I'm not disagreeing, but now that she's in live action, give her a great story and finish, right? Maybe she is there to replace the daughter, right? We do see that statue when Balin's on top of the statue of the father and the head is missing. We know that she's gotten the essence of the daughter to stay alive. How much of that is reality? How much of that is fantasy? How much of that is just strange celestial doohickeys happening? We don't know, right? But maybe this is a great opportunity for Ahsoka to learn, even if she doesn't get the same memories back as Anakin and Obi-Wan do with the rumored Ewan appearance, to like deal with that whole story again and in live action, and a little bit more of the stuff at the source of it, understand a little bit more stuff that could tie to Dawn of the Jedi, because don't forget, Ahsoka, Dawn of the Jedi, New Jedi Order film were supposed to have some connective tissue before, further restructuring happens. So I expect to see some connection there. And I obviously see Sabine in that training be fully fleshed out, see what they learn, see if Sabine is truly someone that can continue to grow in the Force, or is she going to be someone who just learns to balance her and learn skill set with the occasional connection to the Force coming and going to her, maybe learning to be more spiritual and more balanced, and then being able to use the Force as necessary to amplify her already great martial skills, and how they both you know rub off each other. I'm very curious what her experience will be with the World Between Worlds and all the Mortis stuff. I'm very curious if she's gonna be more of, like, the outside looking in, like, with the runes and helping Ahsoka while she's kinda going through some trippy Force cave story. But, yeah, this is a season that has to deal with Ahsoka, and if Sabine doesn't have to do anything with, like, the Mortis stuff, she can always deal with the loose end of Shin Hati, right? If Ahsoka's gotta deal with Balin and them kinda converging, you can always have Sabine and Shin Hati kinda deal with each other. There's a lot of Wolf Ren fans. I'd actually love to see that happen too. So, yeah, let them have reasons to explore Peridea and explore the fallout of Thrawn with the grandmothers, the fallout of Ezra, and maybe some initial work that he did with Thrawn before the great mothers took over, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of ways for the story to go. I wouldn't be surprised if we get Thrawn again, but I would like the story to stay on Peridea and deal in that new galaxy, and then eventually end up with Ahsoka elevated to like a Force deity, where she's a celestial of sorts, but isn't able to, really help out a Luke or help out a Ben Solo by the time of the sequels. Like she's got her own things to balance and take care of, right? And she's got to take care of Balin here for sure. I feel like that's the only way, where everything's been set up that she lost terribly to the guy. She knew how to distract the guy, and now what is all this Mortis stuff going to do? Is she going to be able to stop him from changing the future of the Jedi, of the Force, and all that? I mean, yes, because we've already got the sequels, but to what extent? Is she just gonna be able to limit how the Force is different in this galaxy versus the Star Wars galaxy? Who knows? But it's gotta be about Ahsoka and Mortis and Balin and just her story, and then everything set on Peridea. And then, do you think the Queen Mothers are the Sabbath replacement? No, I don't think we should look at it as the heir to the Empire proper. I think this is just more of a really nice, interesting way of Thrawn having a bit more control of the Force. Sabaoth very quickly kind of turned on him, and Thrawn in Heir to the Empire knew that was going to happen. But to the extent, no, he didn't really understand that. So this will be very interesting. I think now that we've gone Tales of the Empire and what we've heard and seen of the things kind of happening with the return of the Singing Witch clan and all that, maybe there's gonna be some really interesting things to happen on Dathomir, where maybe a Marin can show up, maybe a Cal can show up, and we've got all the different groups and survivors and maybe even reformers of the Dathomir society and the different clans and survivors be the ones to kind of fight them off. So it'll be very interesting to see almost which armies fight again. And I get live action Clone Wars vibes out of that. But that's how I look at it. That he has power. He's gotten them to Dathomir. but are they really gonna be truly sticking with him once they're at their home planet with their home secrets and able to connect with what their descendants figured out on Dathomir and what they've got from the old galaxy? No, I don't expect them to be 100% subservient to him. They're in their new base and home, right? It doesn't make any sense for them to not, like, continue to develop their powers and kinda get out from under his thumb. I think it's more of a slower ticking time bomb than it is with Sabbath. That's the best way to look at it, but I don't think they're gonna be insane and crazy and, like, do Luke and all the crazy Sparty cloning and all that. Let's see what else you got here, critical thinker. Or that Enoch is Rook 2.0. Actually, there's some rumors that the Rook that we see in Rebels isn't even the only Rook. So we might even see Rook again and just be heir to the Empire Rook basically and deal with everything with the Nogri Society and everything if they really want to do that. So yeah, that's how I would do it. I think Enoch is gonna be his own unique character. There's a good chance that he's not alive, but he's got that gold mask. I'd love to see that plate kind of taken off and see his, like, gladiator-esque ravaged face behind it. Like, maybe he's half alive, half dead. Who knows? Something like that. Alright, and then let's see some other questions here. How do you think Ben Solo's fall should be portrayed in the future? Should he be more he was always evil kind of villain who's just self as a title, or tragic fallen hero type more like Cadus? Neither. I mean, I don't think Cadus is tragic. I think Jason Solo is tragic. I just don't really like Cadus and everything that kinda starts off with darkness with him. I get it to some degree, it just doesn't feel right to me to have happened in basically the near immediate aftermath of New Jedi Order. If it happened, like, 10, 15 years later when he, like, kinda went back out and did even more research and exploration and dealt with conflicts on the unknown regions and stuff, maybe, but yeah, I don't know. No, I don't think it should be that, and I don't think he should be always be evil. We know for a fact that Palpatine has been multiple voices in his head. We know that Palpatine's controlled Snoke, who thinks he's independent of Palpatine, and been a voice in Ben's head. So it sometimes it was Snoke, sometimes it was Palpatine acting as Snoke and manipulating both of them. And yeah, I'm sure the Vader stuff also happened in him when he was in, like, Force Visions or, like, during very intense training. So, all that stuff definitely messed him up. I'm sure going to old High Republic temples and exploring the galaxy and everything, that should have been very interesting for him, but then he's dealing with the amplification of the Force and all these voices that he's hearing. Yeah, I could see all of that. So, I don't think it's tragic because of that, or like he had like a classically tragic fallen hero arc. I don't think he's truly evil from the start either. I think he should have some incredible things, that showcase why Luke truly believes that he's gonna be the next chosen one almost. Now, what I think should be tragic about him are the things withheld from him. Like we already know, Leia and Luke withhold that Vader is the same as Anakin. So whatever he knows about Anakin, maybe what fuels him in a way, and then he finds out that horrible tragedy during Bloodline as a grown man, and he's like, "Oh my god," a young man, but still a grown man. And he's like, what have I stumbled into? What is wrong with you people? My own family would do this, right?" I'd expect something like that to be there, but I would expect that to be like the final piece of the puzzle in the same way that it's like the final push for Luke to kind of go in exile, right? I would love to see if we get a Mara Jade or something that he's unwittingly or by accident partly to blame for Mara's death or something. Maybe Snoke kills Mara because of a mistake Ben makes, right? It should be things like that. It should be things where miscommunication, lack of familial connection, how Luke struggles to treat him as his nephew versus one of his main students who has tremendous future potential. It should be like that. It should be the isolation of that, like we see in the Rise of Kylo Ren, where he wants to be so much more, but he also doesn't want to have that Skywalker and Solo legacies holding him down, right? He wants to just be free in the same way Anakin was. And the difference between him and his grandfather is that he theoretically should have that, but he's not getting that, right? So I think that'd be a very interesting thing to parallel all the potential of his story where he gets to do things that young Anakin dreamed of doing, but then he's still got responsibilities. He's still got Luke holding him back. He's still got the crazy voices in his head. He's still got his own mistakes and the mistakes that he unwittingly was forced into, right? And the other tragedies that definitely befall the academy. Even if it doesn't collapse in the same way, I'm sure there's philosophical differences between Order 66 survivors and some of the initial batch of Luke's Order. Maybe he's like the youngest of that initial batch with Jason Solo and all these other people, but then they're like, nah, we're gonna do our own thing, or we're not gonna be Jedi, but just good guy Force users. And that's a struggle for Luke because, he's not gonna let his nephew do that, even if his nephew is like, maybe that's the thing grandfather would have wanted to do. Maybe that's the voice he hears. Anakin being like, go out and do that. All right. And we know that Anakin's also held back in Shadow of the Sith. He's hurt by those weird specters, those Sith Eternal specters on Exegol when Luke is kind of almost like transported there, right? So for some reason, he's not even able to correct the situation. He's not able to be like, "No, that's not me. You're being affected and influenced by some dark energy. I don't know what it is. It might be Palpatine, it might be whatever." So there's a lot of tragedies. What's what makes him a fallen hero is the fact that at the end of the day, the thing that hurts him most is like the things that his parents would held, the unfortunate miscommunications, the things that just didn't work out right. And then bam, the reality that the biggest thing about his family lineage was withheld by the people he should have trusted the most, that he did his very best to despite the complexity of that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that should be more of how it goes. All right. I'm gonna jump over to Skywalker's Academy here. I'm gonna get to some of your other questions here, critical thinker, in a bit, but we're gonna keep this one a little shorter, anyways. It is fairly late, and got work tomorrow, and I did start this one late, but I think we got a good crowd here, pretty active. So, drop in your questions here. Don't forget if you want to ensure that you get something on this before I finish here in the next 15-ish minutes. uh, Drop a super chat. Any small amount of money helps out this channel, especially in these periods where we're a little bit busier with other obligations outside of the channel, and we're kind of ramping ourselves back up into shape for the next TV show, for the next book review, Legends Book Club, etc. So lives are a great way to just talk Star Wars without some of the seriousness, but it can get very verbose, as you've even noticed just by myself. Skywalker's Academy, The Great Mothers. Yes, we made a point of that. Um, Skywalker Academy also said, I don't know how Enoch would be Rook 2.0. They put Rook in animation. Maybe Enoch is the live action replacement, but that doesn't make sense either when they can CGI Jar Jar in the 90s. Yeah, exactly. I don't think we'll truly get Rook back. Um, Maybe we get the Nogri back in some ways as like another competing force or like a replacement if the Great Mothers start to like slip away from his control, if they are more involved in stuff on Dathomir and stuff that they're doing for Thrawn and his needs and control, so and his pursuits of bringing back, the Empire and its glory as as the main figurehead, right? So that's how I would look at it. Um, not 100% sure if at all we're gonna get a Rook, and if Enoch is meant to be that replacement. I mean, he could be. Maybe that's all Filoni was trying to do, just take at least the dynamics and put them onto new characters, but still do original story and all that. Maybe. I could definitely see that, but I I don't know. I don't know if it's necessary, right? So that's how I look at it, and I agree. We if they wanna do that in the first place, they coulda CGI'd it. But to be fair, it is a lot easier to have a guy in a costume walk around and not even have to say anything. And this is someone from The Expanse who I think a lot of people are pretty big fans of. I forget the actor's name. So there are plans for him that will presumably deal with his helmet off and hearing him a bit more clearly. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where they go with him. If he's meant to just purely be a replacement relationship wise with Thrawn, but I don't know. I don't really see the undead to be like, "Oh, wow, you mean that the Empire's been when what Thrawn's been promising about the Empire is not meant for us, that we're just expendable soldiers that we've been revived against our own will?" I feel like the point of reviving them with the Great Mother's dark side magic is that they're alive, but they're not really thinking. So whatever he's got, it's more unique to him where he's got failing vital systems, but he's almost like brain controlled more than he is just a flesh and bones reanimated and moving around for as like dead zombies, like George Romero zombies, right? So that's how I look at that. All right, and then you're looking at Enoch, two separate characters, definitely, definitely. Going back to some of what critical thinker had here, and guys, don't be afraid. Drop some of your questions. Um, Definitely always prioritize getting your first or second comment in. So, just we've got 13 concurrent viewers. We don't have 13 likes here, so make sure you like it and kind of push it out so that people on replay can also see and leave some cool comments that we can reply to as well on the channel. But going back to what we got here, um, for critical thinker, where were we? Where were we? Have you seen The Walking Dead? I've seen season 1, um, but never really was really into zombies and horror in general growing up as a kid, especially since I was a bit more I wouldn't say squeamish, it just wasn't for me at that point, so I managed to see it because I was just volunteering at the library. They had the DVD, and I just used to watch it on the computers there when nobody was looking when I had downtime, so that's the only reason I watched it, and, it's pretty good. I've seen some episodes here and there on passing, but I've heard great things about a lot of the spin-off shows, even if Walking Dead kinda faltered for a few years after, Negan arrived and then kinda fell off for a few seasons and then kinda came back in the last season or 2, and then fell off a little bit again, and then the new shows have been pretty good and expanding the story without really being tied to the comics anymore, so seems like it's fairly healthy. I think the time I wanted to get into it was when Fear of the Walking Dead was coming out, and there was supposed to be a little bit more interconnectivity, but yeah, it seems like Fear the Walking Dead is horrible for a lot of people, and I remember being there at the Comic-Con panel because I was there for the Star Wars panel, and I was excited for another franchise to grow and expand, but it just didn't seem like it did that well. All right, next question you got here. When is the next Legends Book Club stream plan? We don't know. Honestly, it's gonna be a Raid Squadron or something else, but or the Raid Squadron trilogy or something else, but we got the canon books to deal with, Mask of Fear first. We're trying to get a lot of original content getting going. We're going to get a lot of quality of life improvements on the channel. Like things are a bit on a slowdown because Liam had sudden travel plans and I was moving out to a new apartment and stuff. So just kind of what we've already got pre-planned beforehand is happening, and then some of the stuff that we're currently editing that's just a little bit more time sensitive. But we'll get Legends Book Club out again. We'll promote it a little bit better. We'll get the Discord going. The socials will be pumping out again. Podcasts will be a little bit more one-to-one with the YouTube channel. We got a lot of stuff going out there, so it's just that we've been stalled out a little bit with just life stuff happening. But it's coming for sure, and we'll make a good deal about promoting it because even though we did it kinda last minute last time, it was a good conversation, it was a good discussion. Alright, let's see what other questions you got here, critical thinker. Yeah, what's Thrawn's plan to keep I think I already kinda answered that. How does he know they won't, like, mind control him or choke him or something since he doesn't have Issa Amari? And yeah, actually, that's an interesting point. Issa Amari is a very EU concept, like bubbles blocking out the force, kinda pushing it away, but you can still kinda sense around it and all that, right? So, I don't know, I don't think we'll ever get something truly like that or the Vong again in canon. I think they kinda hinted that Issa Lamar won't happen, but we also do see the artwork of them behind Thrawn's desk in Rebels, so maybe they do come back, but they're more of like a limiter, like they limit the force, and maybe that's where like a Sabine or someone, if she returns to the galaxy, because her force potential is so low, it's not something that the very high midichlorian counter of the Esal Marty c maybe even accounts for, and that's where she can use the Force in a situation where Ahsoka or Baylan or Shin Hati can or something, right? That'd be pretty interesting, but yeah, I don't know. I don't expect them to really pull off mind control. I think maybe you can kind of spin a little bit of his characterization where he's a little bit more anti-hero from Timothy Zahn's writing, and then have his time on Peridea where he's been slowly kind of corrupted, like they've taken over parts of his brain and parts of his thinking. That's why he's a bit more staunchly pro-imperial, pro like gotta come back to the old galaxy and rule over, instead of like, no, I gotta take care of the Chiss ascendancy, and Eli's kind of there setting up against the Grisk and other threats in the unknown regions, right? Maybe that's a way to spin it. I think that'd actually be pretty smart to have the Great Mothers be part of the reason why he's more outright heir to the Empire characterization than some of his newer canon characterization in both the pseudo Tron trilogy set during the Imperial era and then Chiss Ascendancy books. So yeah, I don't know. Could be pretty interesting to see the Salamari be a limiter, but I don't expect them to come back. And I think it's more because they're trying to make some of the influence of the Great Mothers a little bit more interesting and varied than what we got here with Sabayat, where he would have just forcefully controlled and changed and made things happen because that's what Jedi are for. That's how things should be. We should be in order, right? That the Miri witches aren't like that, and definitely not the Great Mothers. Uh, hmm. Let's see. Let's see. I think like just continuing on this thread that you've got here, you think Thrawn's pretty pro Imperial and OG Thrawn trilogy, similar to Rebels. I think it fits. Thrawn thinks he's doing the right thing, and yeah, that's the thing, right? It's you can say that Thrawn in Rebels is very pro Imperial, like he's an heir to the Empire, and I think that makes sense because he's kind of got to do things by the book, and when he doesn't, he gets kind of in trouble in those books. He's kind of threatened by Palpatine a lot, especially in that final book. But he's still doing it for the Chiss. He's like, I have to do this for the greater good of the Chiss ascendancy and the bigger threats to get the promised help needed when it finally does arrive. Does he have to hold to those commitments when he's on Purdy and when a different galaxy has not got any sense of survival and plans of getting back? Probably not. But then maybe he meets the Great Mothers and then a lot more of that older characterization, but more staunchly imperial, maybe more staunchly evil guy as opposed to guy with sensibilities of trying to help back his people, right? Kind of comes into play where he's just purely like, I promise you power because you promised me power. And maybe it's just a simplistic thing with the way the magic works with the mindish control. But yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. It could be pretty interesting. And like you said, the Grisks, the demilitarization of the New Republic, those are all valid reasons to bring an empire. But yeah, I don't know. It's this weird thing where it's like Don has made such a big deal about retconning how hardline imperial he is, even if he isn't intelligent, even if he isn't insane like a Palpatine or Sabayat. But it's not like he wasn't evil in those books. He was just very methodical. When he got pissed off, he got someone beheaded on his ship. So it's not like he's not messed up. But then what the canon books have done have been a lot more grayer about it, a lot more like he has to do these and make these sacrifices. It's why the Chiss are kind of afraid of him and like, exile him, but they don't necessarily disagree with what had to be done, right? They've really nailed the anti-hero angle, and he himself doesn't think of himself as like I'm an imperial. Even as an imperial, he's like I have to be an imperial. So yeah, it could work. It could work with the timing being right too. It's basically the demilitarization of the New Republic kind of happens, or like the destruction of the New Republic from Dark Empire into Heir to the Empire, and like the quasi up, quasi down sort of situation. It all lines up too between EU and canon, but I don't know. That's a tough one. Looks like we got a couple questions here, Critical Thinker. If anyone else has got questions, drop a super chat before I kind of close out with Critical Thinker's last few questions here. But yeah, it's been a pretty solid live here, guys. So next week, I think Liam should be back. It'll be both of us. I'll have a proper poster and everything all aligned. But yeah, let's finish off here. Unless you guys have any super chats, but what you got here, I feel like Tari's arc in Legacy of the Force was super rushed and disappointing. On the other hand, Legacy of the Force did a very good job with Ben Skywalker and made him a really likable character. I agree about Ben. Ben is the only reason I can stomach a lot of the Jason stuff because it deals with the familial stuff, it deals with the training, it deals with being a half generation behind everything in New Jedi Order and some of his own upbringing, some of his own fearfulness of the Force, the weight of being named after Ben Kenobi and all that. Like, there's a lot of great stuff about him that I think also continues in Fate of the Jedi. It's just that it kind of gets muddled with how many more characters are in focus there. And it's a fun series. Don't get me wrong. I just by that point, I just kind of fell off of the EU and whatever I was reading. I was like, okay, whatever, go wild. It's just like all the Knights of the Eternal Empire stuff happening with Star Wars: The Old Republic. But what we got here with Legacy of the Force, with his initial kind of steps towards embracing the Force, being properly trained, some of the darker things that Jason is trying to teach him. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to see just how much of his father in Luke and some of the Mara-isms kinda come out. So I really did like that. It did definitely make me stomach a lot of the rush choices that were happening because for some reason, because I guess he was a supporting character for the most part, all his stuff felt perfectly paced, felt like it was the right response to everything that was just dramatically happening and insanely so. Right, and then what you got here, I'd really wanna see Eli Vanto in live action in the Strong Man of our story, but probably never gonna happen. I don't think it's a never say never. It might just be like as Thrawn is dying, maybe instead of like saying, "Oh, but it was done so artfully," right? Maybe he shoots the Chimera to, uh, the Chiss ascendants at Chiss space, and then contacts Eli, and we see Eli on the Ascendancy ships Arlani, and then he gets to be like, "I did what I could. I tried my best, but I couldn't." Right? And maybe that's how you see like that kind of change people's perceptions on him. Like, "Oh my God, was he trying to do the right thing and all that?" And then he did it for love, for his love of his people and all that, even though he ultimately started falling for much darker, much more extreme choices. Maybe I think that'd be a nice way to just have you like kind of cameo and then continue it like a final Zahn trilogy of books with Thrawn and with Thrawn's Fallout, sort of like the Hand of Thrawn duology with the people who knew his legacy, what they were doing with that. Is it gonna happen? Yeah, probably not. And yep, I agree. Zahn definitely softened him as a character. But I see what you mean by like how he can be more staunchly pro Imperial for the Mandoverse and all that. It's not like it doesn't make sense. It's just that I wonder how much of it is going to be like in line with that canon Imperial Thrawn, or if it's going to be more in line with some of the more harsher black and white elements of Heir to the Empire EU Thrawn that, again, were basically being retconned with Hand of Thrawn duology, even though he was dead at that point. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they handle it. I hope Zahn has a lot more to contribute for season 2 of Ahsoka or wherever Thrawn appears next, because by the time he's in charge of the Shadow Council, he has to do a lot more Imperial stuff. But I'd like to see more connective tissue past just like, oh, Ahsoka is the Padawan of Anakin Skywalker. Ah, they're on alliances connection, right? More like proper characterization instead of just events is kind of how I want it to be addressed. And then with the final question here that you got, and this is where we're gonna wrap up the stream, guys. So send it in unless if you got a separate chat, I'll help you out here. But I think we're gonna wrap it up here at regardless. But Critical Thinker ends here with which pieces of media define Star Wars for you? The films, the animated shows, Mandoverse, and/or EU novel, new canon novels. Define is a tough word because I think EU books in a way defined Star Wars for me because there was a period of time where my parents wanted me to stop getting into Star Wars. They wanted me to expand my interest to like fantasy books and stuff like that because I was a kid who only read nonfiction. And then once I stopped reading nonfiction, I only read Star Wars, right? And I only watched Star Wars and I only did things with Star Wars. And I think they got sick of it for like 2 years straight with me like that. So they were like, "No, you can't read any more books. You can't check out books and stuff like that." So I found Wikipedia. So the EU and reading all the articles about characters, about the stories and all that. That's how I engaged with Star Wars for like a year or two before they kind of gave in. And plus, I did definitely try out some other books and stories like Harry Potter and all that. But yeah, definitely the EU books, like the books and Wikipedia were like my defining moments in Star Wars. That's what I think about Star Wars, but not anymore. I think at this point, it's as I've grown and kind of reconnected with everything, it's really been the movies. As I grew as a Star Wars fan, became the original trilogy for me, minus Return of the Jedi, which is ironic because that used to be my favorite Star Wars movie. Um, the prequels don't really. I'm a prequel kid, but I don't think the prequels as a whole feel like they define Star Wars to me. It feels like to me it's more like Revenge of the Sith, parts of the Phantom Menace, but mostly the first 2 original trilogy films, Revenge of the Sith, and especially the Clone Wars, because again, I was alone with Star Wars, right? Like, it was at that period of time where it's like, you play Pokemon as a kid and you love it, and then once you get older, people are like, "Oh, I hate Pokemon." And then once you get older, people love Pokemon again. It was like that, except for the fact that animation is obviously a medium that people don't think about as much, and people are like, "Okay, it doesn't look that great. Why should I even be involved with this stuff?" But kids like me watching it on Cartoon Network every Friday and all that, like, it was awesome, and it was so good to see Anakin properly characterized. I loved seeing Obi-Wan. Ahsoka grew up, was our POV through that war, and how she evolved as a character was awesome. It was Star Wars at home, and in a way that didn't require me to go to, like, a Blockbuster or rent out the movies, right? Or buy the movies. It was something that would just be on my TV, and if I wasn't playing the Lego Star Wars games or the Star Wars Episode 3 video game, I'd be watching the Clone Wars, right? And that definitely carried middle school for me. So by the end, I would say now Star Wars is definitely defined as Episode 4, definitely Episode 5, Episode 3, and the Clone Wars. Always gonna treat Star Wars as more of a visual medium. That's why I'm always a lot more lenient on Disney Plus and stuff like that, even if I do not like a lot of how Chapek brought his straight to VHS sequel sensibilities when he was in charge of all the golden age of animation Disney turning into, like, just money buckets, and that's what he did with Iger's baby. I'm sure Iger played a role in that too, but he pushed out a lot of quantity over quality, but I think I've always been a little bit nicer to the shows and stuff because I like that stuff, and I studied film and all that, so those pieces of mediums will always define Star Wars for me. Mandoverse, not so much. I mean, I think it's great, it's fun, and it was, really awesome in a time where the sequels, people didn't really love them as much, right? Um, but that being said, I would still take an episode 8 over, a season 3 of Mandoverse, right? I'd still take a lot of episode 7 over, the majority of the Mandoverse just because it's a movie budget and it gets me going and there's an energy and thrill to that. But yeah, I mean, I still love the sequels as films. I just don't love them as an era yet, and I'm very glad to see I still haven't caught up yet because I've been so busy with the new Legacy of Vader comics. I haven't caught up, and I really want to be caught up in time with the High Republic comics and manga and stuff to be ready for the Path of the Lightsaber manga set between episode 7 and 8. I can't wait to see what new stuff comes out. I hope there's some sort of animated bridge piece between 8 and 9 that's, all set up with the things going on in the galaxy with the destruction of the New Republic, with the Resistance, with everybody else, right? So, yeah, pretty excited about everything there, but yeah, that's how I would define Star Wars for me. Skywalker Academy says, "The movie defines it for me too, the rest gives a different perspective." Right, different perspective, and I think it's just the convenience of the Clone Wars is why I would always put it up there and because it was so long running, and the fact that it came back, right? To have that much of a legacy to come back, not even the movies really have that. Like, the movies almost kinda come out because you have to have movies because that's just the way Star Wars is digested for by most people, but for a TV show to do that, that's crazy. And then Critical Thinker says, "For me, it's the 6 OG films, Clone Wars Rebels, EU novels, particularly NJO. That's most of the Star Wars media I like and think about the most. I definitely lean more towards the story-focused Star Wars than visual-focused Star Wars." Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think visual focus always has to deal with, like, the flashier elements, the lightsaber fights, the dog fighting, the big explosions, the scenic vistas and all that. And that's part of the reason why some people don't love the prequels because it's super CGI heavy, but when you really see how well the politics of that trilogy and a lot of the political storytelling told there has aged, and ironically enough too, the sequels have aged not as well, but have, like, had some nice aging about, like, how can fascism return and all that stuff, right? And how does a democracy fall with the prequels? Like, all that stuff has aged really well. It's just that the dialogue is atrocious and it's not the best writing. So, what do you focus on? The stuff that is pretty good, that does take a lot of time, and that is the visuals. And it feels a little unnecessary when you should be dealing with a good story and a good written story with good dialogue for the characters that leads into episode 4, 5, and 6, which, the bones are there. It's just not there within each individual film besides episode 3. And even that, as much as I love it, it is messy, but it's the final concluding act. And it's only gotten better, frankly, because I think everyone's perception of that film has been absolutely changed by the Clone Wars and the storytelling done there. And you say, I mean, I love the visual stuff too, but I'll take a story focused Star Wars project with minimal visuals, whereas for some, the spectacle is more vital to Star Wars. Great stream, man. See you later. Yeah, this will be where we ended here, but just to answer that final comment, yes, story focused Star Wars project with minimal visuals. the High Republic. That's why Liam and I love that. The only thing we don't love about it is that sometimes it jumps between mediums too liberally and different age ranges too liberally, and that you kind of need to know all this stuff, and it's so completionist in a way that not even New Jedi Order was. And it's been spaced out a lot, which New Jedi Order didn't really have that issue. At least was kind of spread pretty evenly. So yeah, that's the one thing that I hope more people jump into on our channel, through our channel. The High Republic is awesome. Even Phase 3 has been really good. It's just been so spread out compared to Phase 1, and it's doesn't have that weird thing where Phase 2 just jumped back 150 years. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for something like Critical Thinker where you're focused on story, I would recommend the High Republic. I'd recommend the EU books like New Jedi Order and stuff. But I think that's gonna do it for the live stream today. Thank you guys so much for joining. We had a great time here, a lot of good conversations despite this being mostly more of a Q and A and not really a lot of news to be discussed. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll be back next Tuesday, most likely, with Liam in tow. A little bit more of our traditional stuff. You'll see an updated version of our live with some new plugins and stuff. A little bit more of a refresher to push us into the next big league of the Star Wars Lads channel and the Star Wars YouTube community. So stay tuned. The updates are coming like we've been promising. We'll have a Legends Live book club. The Mask of Fear review is coming hopefully within the next week. You'll see some cool shorts. Our socials be updated, the podcast be updated. Uh, Things have just been a little busy and a little hectic, but yeah, stay tuned. Star Wars Lads isn't going anywhere. We're going to be ramping up hard here with a lot of original content as well as we get into obviously the exciting return of Andor. And once we see a trailer and all that, we'll be reacting to all that stuff too. We'll be talking more about that, and we'll always have these lives going on until we transition to those episode live reactions and discussions there. But thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.